So here I am again, thinking about the severe retardation that I've grown up with in church culture by very well-meaning people, I believe, but very wrong people. I grew up a child of the early 80s, and I had parents who I expect were very much like most other parents at that time. They were well-meaning, and I know they loved me, and I know they were just trying to do what they thought was best, but they let other people proxy parent. And by other people, I mean big, influential people, the influencers of that day, which would have been James Dobson, all of his cohorts, the Life on the Edge series, Josh Harris, and just a lot of really, really destructive people. Yeah, the other guy I was thinking of, Bill Gothard. Boy, you want to talk about some extremely toxic stuff you should never have exposed your children to. These perhaps very well-meaning teachers ended up governing a gigantic minority or majority of the evangelical church at that time, especially in the States. And it had profound negative effect on me and I think many of you out there know this for yourselves, where it became, I found so much shame in all these things that just did not exist. The Life on the Edge series, talking about all these things that they were worried about were going to happen to teens and children at that time. You know, and it was coming from a lot of fear-mongering of adults at that time, needing to make sure they had control or good influence over their children. But by doing that, they impressed or created a narrative in their kids' minds that their kids became duty-bound to follow. And the kids didn't know any better. They were just like, I guess that's true. Mom and dad think it is, and my church says it is. So this must be true about the world around me. That could have been a lot of different things for all of you, but there's a truth of the law of first exposure, or the law of first mention, you know, where when you are exposed to information that becomes true in your mind the first time around, that usually sets the tone for what you perceive truth is about that particular topic. And it becomes very difficult to untruth that later on with actual evidence to the contrary. In our cognitive biases. That's just a natural human tendency we have. Well, anyway, so Josh Harris, you know, and again, all these people, Josh Harris, Bill Gothard, James Dobson, you know, I do actually forgive them. I've spent a lot of time in real forgiveness for these people, because it's like, God, I don't think they knew what they were doing, and I don't hold them an account, but that teaching was wrong and highly toxic. It's absolutely doctrines of demons to teach your children all these very bizarre sexual restraint practices, and no wonder we have so many of us now that have either acted out or are still stuck inside of a closet of hurt and fear and shame because of thoughts we have or things like that. Mine happens to be lust and not having been married and any of that. I know a lot of friends who deal with same-sex attraction. And these are all things that came from, unfortunately, the church causing this to happen because of these very strange repressive teachings. And Colossians, the end of Colossians 2, talks about this kind of stuff, these piety things that we do, having no impact because all they do is just harm the flesh, but they don't actually change the spirit. I'm really paraphrasing the end of Colossians 2 there, but you read that, and if you're understanding that Paul's books are about emphasizing and really pounding home the truth of what walking by faith and embracing the grace of God actually is. And I did not grow up in a culture of that with evangelical Churchianitydom. I grew up in a world of modern day Phariseeism, and it fell right back into the evangelical church. We're a brood of vipers and very toxic Pharisees again about everything. We judge everybody. And it's no wonder there's a gigantic movement now of either people calling themselves post-evangelical or deconstructionists or any of that kind of stuff, which I don't like using labels and terms, but I totally identify with what the idea is behind both of those, because that's the point of this channel. It is to deconstruct all the garbage you have swallowed and I have swallowed, and to ask ourselves, is this actually really God that I should have been listening? That was this God speaking, or was this people speaking on behalf of God and wrongly? And Paul talks about this over and over, and I'll spend more time in other discussions like this, emphasizing those points, but it has only been in the last 5 to 7 years of my life where I've really started to embrace what it means to walk by faith and to live by faith and to embrace the gospel that Jesus preached, which is the gospel of faith. His repentance that Jesus was talking about was in one aspect, he talks about works, but when he's addressing works to the Jews at that time, he was addressing their militant daily lifestyle that they had created around themselves as their structure for why they were righteous. And we have done exactly the same thing in evangelicaldom now. We have all these silent mental practices we do, and we justify them saying, well, this is what makes God happy about me because I pray this much or do this, that, and fast, or all these other things. And while some of them may be physical actions, many of them are also actions of the heart and mind, but they are wrong positions. They are wrong postures to take. And they aren't being done by faith. They're being done by rote. They're being done by militant practice and discipline, but it isn't coming from faith. And something that has stood out in the last few years for me is the relationship of faith, hope, and love, especially how Corinthians talks about it. Hebrews talks about faith is the evidence of things unseen, the substance of things hoped for. Hope is where things have to start in order for you to want to see change in any aspect of your life that you're wanting to see change in. And as you become more convinced of that hope, that is what it becomes faith. And Galatians 5:6 tells us what is important is that it is faith coupled with love as we walk out these things. And if you start looking at your life and you look at the literal moment-by-moment decisions that are constantly in front of you, passing you by literally moment by moment, like me doing this video right now, I'm speaking to you by faith about what we're talking about here, believing that God's Spirit is taking these words, penetrating your heart, and that it's actually causing you to stop and really reevaluate what it is you're holding on to. Because if you're holding on to things just because it teaches well in church and it makes you feel better when you go home, but nothing is different about you for the next 166 hours after that, and then you just come back and repeat it all over again later, a whole week later, that's not faith. That's just you being in a discipline. That's just you being in religion. And it is, without faith, it's impossible to please God. And that is what changed me almost a decade ago, 8 years ago on Valentine's Day of 2017, February 14th. And that was a radical transformation day for me. It broke me. It was a day that broke me in half and irreparably damaged me. And I've had to come crawling back out of the broken open shell that I was to find out who I really should have been this entire time. A lot of metaphor, I suppose, hiding in that, so sorry about all that, but anyway, I'll talk more about some of this stuff later.